Thank you, Daryl, and very much for having me. It's an honor to be here today. So I will share my screen in a few moments, but I'll just do a couple or just introduce myself to start. So I am Hayley Farrell, working in the UK for a company called Emcore UK, which is in the facilities management industry. And the way I came to be presenting this webinar today on health and well-being is I'm a specialist member of IRSM. My background is in human resources and health and well-being, but we were really fortunate and very grateful to have won the award for our well-being strategy this year at the IRSM Awards. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about that strategy. It is not just a one-year strategy, but a 5-year strategy. So hopefully you'll find the session enlightening. And it'll answer some of the questions that you may have about the topic health and well-being. So I'm going to share my screen now. I trust you can see that. Don't know if there are any issues, please do let me know, otherwise I will start. Thank you. Okay, so just a little bit about the company that I work for, Emcore UK. We are a facilities management company and we have a national presence across the UK. We have 4,500 employees roughly, and we service over 17,000 buildings. The reason I highlight this is it just demonstrates the very remote nature of our workforce. We're not all together, we're not all in one office. We work on some really remote locations, which in itself is quite a challenge in terms of monitoring health and well-being and supporting employee health and well-being. We also work very closely with BSI, which is an accreditation organization, using the ISO standardization. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about 45003, which is the baby sister of 45001. So we will be exploring that later on during today's session. Okay, so where does well-being fit within the organization I work for? So last year, they decided to take well-being outside of the human resources function. So in most organizations, well-being sits under the people pillar or under the HR pillar. We have taken the decision to move it into the Wellbeing, Sustainability and Assurance department. Now, in that department, we've got the head of safety operations. Apologies, let me just close that. So we've got the head of safety operations, the wellbeing business partner, head of risk assurance, head of technical assurance, and environment and sustainability manager. Now, this was really a step change for us as an organization and something we are quite proud of because not many organizations have done this as yet. But the reason we did it is because we believe well-being is actually part of health and safety. So health in its true essence includes well-being. And that's why we have positioned it in this arena. Now, it is really important to highlight that our department works in conjunction and as an integrated collaborative with the other parts of the organization, such as supply chain, IT, business development, operations, and very closely with HR. Because whilst it doesn't sit in the HR function, there are some very clear crossovers between some of the roles. Okay, and I will note, I heard Daryl mention that the next topic might be on waste management and the environment. And you'll see well-being sits within our organization alongside environment and sustainability, alongside risk and alongside head of safety operations, because we believe well-being, it's about the sustainability of your workforce. And how do you look after their health? By identifying any hazards in the workplace that may have an impact on them. So where is there a risk in terms of mental health and well-being? And what is the frequency of this risk and how often does it occur? So why well-being? We started our journey by understanding what well-being means to us in our organization. And I think this is a really good starting point for any organization. Now, to start that, you really need to understand what some of the challenges are that are facing your people. Okay, so there are a number of different areas or different strands of well-being. We talk about lifestyle health, we talk about mental health, talk about your financial well-being and your social well-being. So what are the challenges in the organization in terms of those aspects of well-being? But also, what are the risks, as I alluded to earlier, that are potentially impacting an employee in the workplace? So starting point is to understand your challenges. You can do this by using data within your organization, and we'll explore that in a bit more detail. But for us at our organization, we've got a theme and we've got an aim. So the theme is to encourage authentic employee well-being and decent work through an integrated approach to support Emcore UK's purpose of a better world at work. Now, you can see there are 5 tiles at the bottom, which are our 5 global goals. So Emcore UK have identified 5 global goals that we want to support as part of our strategic intention. And it's integral that our well-being strategy is based upon and built into these goals. Because what you don't want to do is have a well-being strategy or an objective that doesn't align with the strategic intention of the organization. It's really critical, especially if you want to embed it and you want it to be authentic and for it to really make true change. Our aim is to generate awareness, prevention, self-management, and line manager support to promote the adoption of an inclusive well-being culture among our people, whilst providing the infrastructure, policies, and a psychologically safe environment where everyone can bring their true selves to work. Okay, so I just want to highlight a couple of words there. Inclusive being a really important word. Equality, diversity, and inclusion is another really important aspect that businesses are focused on today. My view is that well-being and ED&I shouldn't be separated. You can't be an inclusive company without looking after the mental health and well-being of your employees. So when you are thinking about these strategies or thinking about areas for improvement, it's important to see it as a holistic piece of work rather than an individual strategy. Now, inclusivity also talks into the challenges. So depending on the location of work, the age group of the workers or the workforce, the type of job that they're doing, particularly in terms of what risks they might be exposed to, could also be things like demographic in terms of religion, race, etc. These are all important things to think about when you're developing your wellbeing strategy to make sure that it is inclusive. We come on to the other word, infrastructure. Infrastructure is about the working environment. So whether that be having the right chair, the right desk, an area to be able to take a break and be safe, do you have the infrastructure to support a well-being strategy and the health and well-being of your employees? Infrastructure also looks at, is combined with data. So I have spoken about data, but it is really important and makes a world of difference when you're putting together or thinking about well-being. What are the needs of the organization? And I'll stress this because there's a lot of stuff out there in the world of well-being, and there's a lot of applications. So things like mindfulness apps, things like yoga classes, personal trainers. The problem is, if you don't know what your workforce need, you might spend money on things that actually aren't going to make a difference. Now, I call all of those things tactical interventions. So interventions for specific needs, but there's also a really important part of strategy that looks at risk, and that's the inherent risks inside organizations or inside the behaviors that we also need to take into consideration when we're talking about employee well-being. There's policies there, so making sure you've got the right policy in place, and then psychologically safe environment. And this is a bit of a buzzword, I think, at the moment, particularly with the 45,003 standard. But essentially, how do we make sure that we are reducing the risk inside an organization that is impacting employee mental health? Okay. So there are a number of frameworks, and one of the frameworks is the mental health at work commitment. There's also the thriving at work standards that a lot of well-being is underpinned by. What we did is we came up with 6 ways to well-being for our organization. Connect, be active, nourish, take notice, keep learning, and give. And these are the fundamentals of a lot of the stuff that we do as an organization to promote well-being. Connect may be connecting to yourself in terms of, what do I need today? Encouraging people to take a proactive approach to self-managing their own well-being. Because yes, there's a responsibility of an organization to look after employees and not put them at risk, but that is also matched by employees being educated and being made aware of the role that they can play in managing their own well-being. So staying connected to colleagues, staying connected to your line manager, staying connected to your loved ones. These are really important parts of well-being. Also connecting, as I've mentioned, with yourself, checking in with yourself. How am I today? What do I need to do to support my own well-being? Really, really important question, and a simple question you can ask yourself. Be active. In its simple terms, get outdoors, do a 5-minute stretch session in your lounge, 10 squats whilst you're waiting for the kettle to boil. How can we encourage our workforce to be active and to exercise in a way that suits them? The other way that I really like to look at the words be active is, how can we encourage people to be active with their finances through financial education? How can we encourage people to be active, particularly line managers, in keeping ongoing, open, transparent communication with their staff? So there's a number of ways you can use be active. Nourish. Nourish could be around the food that you're eating. Are you staying hydrated? Are you having the right amount of nutrients in your diet? But also, are you taking regular breaks from your screen to really nourish your mind, nourish your soul, being around people, doing things that you enjoy, that uplift you and give you purpose? Really important part of looking after your own well-being as well. Taking notice at those around you. So looking for things like early warning signs. I like to use the example of, if I came onto camera during a check-in meeting with my team and I was really quiet and I had my head down, I would hope somebody would notice that there might be something not okay. Because normally I would come on and I would be loud and I'd be waving my hands and I would be embracing. Whereas if I was quiet, it would be an immediate thing for somebody to notice. Let me check in with Hayley after the meeting just to make sure that she's okay. So take notice of those around you. Take notice of your own feelings. Also take notice of the small things that bring you joy. When you do go for a 5-minute walk in your lunch break, take notice of the trees around us, of the environment that we are so lucky to live in, and be grateful for those small things as well. Keep learning. So learning is a really important part, whether it be part of your own self-development or growth aspirations. However, being mindful that not everybody has the same aspirations. But another key area for keep learning is specifically around what training can be offered in the organization to support well-being. So it might be mental health first aid, might be resilient training. It might be training just to teach people what well-being actually means. So how can you keep learning and keep growing as an individual and as teams and as an overall organization? Another way I like to engage with our employees around keep learning is through our monthly well-being newsletter, is giving them information about important health topics. So if there are specific reasons for absenteeism within your organization, how do we educate our employees to take a proactive approach? So the more we teach them about something that may be an issue, the more they will be able to recognize that in themselves or be able to relate specifically about mental health. So if we teach people what are some of the early warning signs, what are the things that you can recognize in yourself, they can then start to take responsibility. If they can see patterns within themselves, they may be more likely to reach for help earlier on than it becoming a bigger problem. And lastly, give. You can give your time to colleagues. You can give your presence, just being there to listen. We don't always have to solution everything, but just being there to have a well-being conversation and that how are you actually goes a much longer way than an intervention. People want to be seen, people want to be heard and appreciated. And often just giving them that time and space to do so goes a really long way. So as I said, these are our 6 ways to well-being. They are built on an existing framework, and they're a really great starting point to encourage conversation, but also to have initiatives come out of them. So we've done things like a virtual Kilimanjaro climb. So we've encouraged people to get their steps up. We've also done some menopause training in the workplace. So we've kept people abreast of current topics. We keep learning under that banner. So encouraging people to keep learning and learning things that normally they'd be uncomfortable about, but it helps them not only in the workplace, but in their life as well. So it's a good idea to have something like this because you can really spark a lot of conversations around having a framework. Okay, I'm going to come on to 45,003, which is part of our journey that we are currently in. It was only launched about 2 months ago, and we as an organization are hoping to be early adopters through BSI. We've conducted a gap analysis, and this is really to support the ongoing strategy. So whilst we've got a number of interventions, it's now also about understanding the risks in the workplace that impact an employee's mental health and well-being. Okay, so essentially everybody has mental health, and this is a really important thing to touch on. Mental health is on a continuum. So we've all got mental health. Sometimes we might have a day where we don't feel as happy or as motivated as usual. Absolutely normal. That doesn't necessarily that you've got mental ill health, but you are struggling with your mental health in that given time because of a specific circumstance, etc. So we must really be conscious that as we're all human beings, we've all got things going on in our lives, and it's not about firstly ignoring them. It's learning to cope with them and understand ways that you can be open and honest at work about how you're feeling, but also realize that there are a number of things that you can do to make yourself feel a little bit better. So I think it's important to stress that whilst organizations have duty of care to recognize risk in the organization, employees also have a duty of care to look after their own health and well-being as well. So these words, psychological and psychosocial health and safety at work, are really big words, and they can be very off-putting to a lot of people. Essentially what they mean are, what are the sources of harm in the workplace that impact an employee's mental health and well-being, and how do we prevent and manage these risks? And I know that I'm speaking to all of you as part of IIRSM who are experts in risk management, and this will just be another area that I'm sure over time you will all specialize in, the mental health and well-being side of things as well. But why is this important? And the challenge we have is, how far down the psychology route are we going down? Because essentially the business is running an operation. You've got customers to support, you've got clients to deliver on. But to do that, you need your people. So normally we would say, if people can remain well, stay in work, less absenteeism days, they will be more productive. But what are the motivators for them to be more productive? How do we make sure that not only do they stay well, but that they enjoy work? They feel valued, they feel that they can work in an open environment where they are accepted for who they are. Because an environment like this encourages innovation, creativity, knowledge sharing, and really we talk about going the extra mile, but it's those people that really do show up, and that's where the true essence of productivity is. So yes, we need to do it because we need to be compliant in terms of risk, identifying what those factors are, but it's really about having people who are happy in work, so they work hard, and you are caring about them, also showing an interest in their potential to grow, and through their behavior that naturally grows the organization at the same time. So just some stats to support the thinking behind this. The labour force survey last year in the UK, there were 38.8 million estimated working days lost due to work-related ill health and non-fatal workplace injuries. Of that, only 6.3 million of them were injury-related. 17.9 million was work-related stress, anxiety, and depression. And 14.6 was work-related ill health. So there is absolutely no doubt a focus on safety, and people have the right to come to work and leave work in a safe manner and in the same way they arrived. It becomes a bit more challenging when we're talking about these issues in the workplace that are potentially adding to stress, anxiety, depression. It's easier when we talk about ill health because we've got things like respiratory questionnaires, skin abnormalities, and health surveillance questionnaires that may be able to cover that area. But if you look at this, 17.9%, that is a large amount of money and a lot of time off for people who have to go off for absenteeism. So that in itself is one of the business cases for why we should be doing this. Now, this slide shows, I've been talking about the risks in the workplace that impact an employee's mental health. These are the risks. So I'm not going to go into detail with all of them, but they're divided into 3 areas: how the work is organized, social factors at work, and work environment, equipment, and hazardous tasks. Now, what I will say is not all of these risks will impact individuals in the same way. And also it depends on the likelihood of this risk causing harm. So the duration, the frequency, and the level of stress that it's causing. Okay. So how do we go about identifying these risks in the workplace? So the plan, do, check, act is identifying what the risks are, planning how we're going to potentially mitigate some of these risks, act on your plan, check whether your plan worked, and if it didn't, act again to correct. It's kind of a continuous improvement loop. Okay. On the left-hand side, you can see there's a diagram with some pinks and purples, greens and blues. Now, this is a report that was released a couple of weeks ago by Business in the Community that talks about what if your job was good for you? And essentially, that's what we're trying to do. We're making sure that good work, good job design, and psychologically safe environments can lead to better health and well-being. So if we don't talk about health and well-being, but we just talk about better working environments, that will lead into better health and well-being. What we can't do is focus on health and well-being without looking at those risks that are hindering us from good work, good job design, and psychologically safe environments. Okay. So planning stage is being able to understand what are the gaps in terms of the standard. So we know there's a standard which basically tells us what is best practice. A good starting point is to do a gap analysis and look at some of those gaps. Where is there area for improvement? To do this, we need to understand the issues, and I spoke about understanding your organization. So what are the internal and external issues? What are the needs of our workers? What is the commitment from leadership to make change? Is there need for policy changes? How do we consult with our workers to ensure participation? And how do we make sure we've got the right resources, competency, awareness, and communication in place to be able to make any of these changes? We then want to plan how we're going to take these actions and put together an implementation plan to address those risks. I will really focus here on the importance of relationships. So when we talk about health and well-being or good job design, getting the buy-in from line managers and from employees through consultation is so important so that they feel that we're not doing it to them. They're part of the process and we're doing it for them to improve working environments, job satisfaction, so that they've got a happy, safe place to work, which ultimately is going to have really good benefits in terms of productivity and client and customer feedback as well. So then we implement what we planned to do. Eliminating the hazards and reducing the occupational health risks, managing the change, understanding whether we can do it in-house or whether we need to outsource, and what our impact is on our supply chain. And also, how do we make sure that emergency preparedness and response and rehabilitation is top of the agenda in terms of what we're doing. What we don't want to do is overlook the importance of things like rehabilitation in supporting people's health and well-being back into the workforce or to remain in the workforce. So we do what we said we needed to do within specific control measures. We then monitor and confirm whether these objectives have been achieved. So we look back and we think, okay, this is what our gap said. This was our action plan. We then did this. How are we doing? Okay. And we then look for continual improvement, or is there any incident or non-conformity and corrective action? Now, this can be quite overwhelming, and I will admit when I first saw this, I was like, where do we start? What do we do? How do we develop a mental health risk assessment? And are we assessing the individual, or are we assessing the organization or the specific area of the organization where there might be a risk? Risk identification looks at the whole. We're looking at behaviors. We're not looking at individuals, we're looking at behaviors. So things like workload, if people are working really, really long hours, or if people are not paid on time and you're causing them excessive stress because they've got commitments in terms of finances. Things like isolation, so where people have had to work remotely and they're not used to it, how can we support them? And what is the risk in terms of, right, we've had COVID, we haven't been able to really mitigate it, but how long are people going to be able to carry on working before it becomes an issue? Do we need to have more regular check-ins? Okay. So I've kind of spoken to this a little bit, but good practice in addressing psychosocial risks. So identifying the workplace risk, addressing the cause, not the problem, empowering people to speak up about risks. So in the same way you would report a near miss or a slip, trip and fall or safety observation report, how do we empower people to speak up about risks in the workplace that will impact mental health and well-being? That's about creating a culture where people feel safe to do so. Realizing that it needs to be authentic and genuine. Are we genuinely saying that we as an organization are going to take this seriously and we are allowing you to talk about these risks without fear of lack of progression or fear of being dismissed? So make sure that we are doing it genuinely, following the plan, do, check, act. So even if it's one risk that we identify, how can we resolve that? It might be bullying and harassment, for example. Do we have a policy in place? Do we have a grievance procedure so that people can confidently disclose it? What is our process to follow up on that? Those are all things that can reduce the risk because we've got a policy that says this is what we do if there is bullying and harassment. Hopefully that will show people that we do take it seriously. However, if we are seeing that our cases continue to rise, we need to do something a little bit differently. Okay. How do we measure well-being? So measuring well-being is really about looking at the data. This is a model that was created for Emcore. In the middle is our DNA, our purpose and our values. As I mentioned in the beginning, make sure that any strategy, any intervention is aligned to your purpose of the organization. We looked at what our people need. So our people critical success factor and making sure that we were contributing to sustainable development goals, because it's not just about our people, but it's about the communities that we operate in and their families, so our employees' families and future generations. How are we impacting them by the work that we're doing and the risk that we are imposing potentially? I've really harped on this existing data piece, but things like your absenteeism data, occupational health referrals, if you've got an employee assistance program, the data from there, your engagement surveys, your turnover data, looking at this information and saying, is it telling us that there is a risk? Are people feeling stretched? What can we do about it? Then developing your strategy, putting in implementation plans, and measuring the maturity of your progression. So we have got an in-house developed maturity model that looks at the maturity of well-being. And essentially, this is a gap analysis tool to support account directors, or because of the nature of our business, we've got different account directors operating in different areas. They can see what good looks like, and then they can tailor the well-being strategy to suit the needs of their people. It's really important that we do look at the specific and local needs. Okay, so that's how we do it. If I go back a slide, this is what it looks like in a really neat, simple, straightforward diagram. But in reality, this is the nature of a well-being strategy. There are lots of different things going on at the same time. So how do we identify the risks at the same time as developing financial strategy and education and awareness about using your finances or preparing for your pension or your retirement? How do we make sure that leaders role model and lead by example? How are we setting up forums where people can come and discuss different things, for example, women's health or men's health? How are we identifying trends and monitoring these things? So it doesn't always work in a nice, neat fashion, but it does all get done in the end. In terms of our approach, it is definitely a collective approach. So tone from the top, leaders leading by example, role modeling, and really leading rather than managing. So how do we make sure that people really do take a proactive approach to their own well-being? Is by leaders leading by example, turning off their laptop at the hours that within working hours, take your annual leave, go out for a 5-minute walk to show your team that you're doing it too. The tone from the top is really important. We talk about the mood in the middle. That's the middle management, making sure that they understand the role that they play. They are the ones who have day-to-day contact with the employees. So making sure that they have well-being conversations and that they have the training and competency to be empathetic, to listen, and to take time out from their busy days. But not only do they feel equipped to have these conversations, do they have the time in their working day? That's always a challenge, resource. The operation needs to be delivered, but we need to look after our people. So giving managers permission through things like a mental health charter, through things by making sure that we've got policy and that we've got procedure to support management. And lastly, thinking about the language that we use, creating awareness about well-being across your organization through newsletters, sharing our stories, so sharing our own mental health and well-being journeys. we've all got it. We're all human beings. I feel strongly and passionately about the fact that sometimes life doesn't always go according to plan. And often we know somebody who struggles with mental health, whether it be diagnosed or undiagnosed, and talking about it and normalizing it goes a long way, sometimes much further than any webinar or any training course can do. But simply taking time to talk to a colleague about your experience can really help them open up about their challenges and seek help as well. Okay, I'm conscious of time, and I know we want to leave some time for questions, but there are a number of different practical things that you can do in terms of having well-being champions within your organization, doing mental health awareness training or first aid training, having regular well-being forums, either with set agendas or where people can come and talk about concerns. We've spoken about policies and charters. We've spoken about the different well-being pillars, mental, financial, lifestyle, clinical, which is things like musculoskeletal, diabetes, cancer. Making sure that you've got support underneath those pillars are really good starting points to make sure that people, if they have got challenges, they know where to go. And I think this is my last slide, but is it worth it? Is health and well-being worth it? So absolutely yes, because I'm passionate about mental health and well-being, but because I think we're all human beings. And organizations rely on humans coming to work to do a job. Yes, we get paid for it, but we want people to be able to give their best selves to the work that they do for innovation, to be productive, to really drive organizations forward. But not only is it about productivity and improving the workplace, it's also about something we talk about in terms of social impact. The impact that we have on the community and the impact that we have on people around us, and making sure we've got a sustainable workforce and we're looking after future generations as well. So it's absolutely worth it from it's the right thing to do. We're making people live healthier lives for longer, whether that means staying in work or not. And hopefully we're contributing to making a difference in the community to make sure that they understand how they can look after their health and well-being as well. And that's where organizations can support wider agendas of community health, community well-being, and making an impact on the future, because it's not just for us today, but it's for the children who are going to come through into the working place in the next 10 years as well. Okay, and that is the end of my presentation. I think we've got some questions now. Donna?
Yes. Hi, Hayley. Sarah, did you want to say anything before we carry on with the questions?
I think that was excellent.
I think we've lost Daryl there for a second. We're not hearing any sound, but I've got a couple of questions for you, Hayley. The first one, thank you to everybody who submitted questions. I know that there was some on the WhatsApp group. Apologies if I can't read, I didn't get all of the names, but I will try my best. So the first question, Hayley, is how has the COVID pandemic affected well-being?
Great question. So we've had a health pandemic. We've potentially got an impact on our economy, and then we've got a mental health pandemic due to the fact that mental health statistics have really increased. So I think things like loneliness, where people have not been used to having to work from their homes or not been used to long periods of lockdown. A lot of their freedoms potentially have been taken away because we've had to protect the vulnerable and protect ourselves. So people have been struggling with this kind of thing, lack of being connected. So yes, there has been an impact on mental health. I don't believe that we are seeing the true impact of it yet. I think we will probably only see the true impact of COVID in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of mental health illnesses. But yes, it's absolutely had a huge impact on it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hayley. The next question follows along the same lines, which I'm assuming is due to COVID. So some companies are delaying paying employees because invoices are not being paid on time by suppliers. And how does this sort of thing affect wellbeing? I know you mentioned it briefly in your presentation as well.
Yes. So one of the key areas or pillars is financial wellbeing. And not only is that making sure people are paid fairly and equitably for the work that they're doing, and that they're rewarded and compensated for, but also making sure that they know how to spend their money wisely. So whether it be budgeting, planning for their future. And I think, in my view, and I cannot speak from experience because I'm fortunate to not be in an organization where there are financial constraints, but that will have an impact on their mental health, because it's the basic needs. You know, they've got a family to support, mouths to feed, and I think that them not having their finances to make their monthly payments or bills or food will cause stress, anxiety, overwhelm, and uncertainty.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. What is the definition of quality of life in relation to well-being, and would that definition vary depending on a person's lifestyle?
Okay. I suppose if we think of quality of life, is that the standard of health, comfort, and happiness that an individual experiences? So what is it, the definition in relation to well-being? So I'm not sure if you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but that's how I see it, is basic needs. So running water, shelter, food. If those needs are met, we can go to the next level. And right at the top is self-actualization, which is around purpose and identity. So I think if your basic needs are met, you can start to talk about other things like well-being. But language is so important. And I think this quality of life question depends on what people know, and it depends on what people are used to. And this is where we talk about risk. The severity or the frequency of risk will be different for different individuals. So if they're used to a certain quality of life, it might be a really small change that will improve their well-being. It really is individual, and I think it depends on the circumstances, but I think that's probably a question that we could go into quite a lot of detail on. Probably not today, but good question.
Yeah.
Question,
Yeah, very good question. Just another question, Hayley. How can we identify workers facing mental health problems in the workplace? So I suppose from a management point of view as well. So as someone's manager, how would we identify they were suffering?
Okay, great question. There is a number of resources online. If you go on and you kind of type in early warning signs of mental health, it's really about getting to know your people. So, and this is where sometimes getting to know them, not just in work, know what they like, know what their hobbies are, and that's okay. It doesn't mean if you get to know them, you're too close to them. I think there's a challenge where sometimes managers and supervisors struggle with that, but getting to know who you are will help you understand when they may be a little bit off, when something isn't going right, and will enable you to become closer so they feel safe to come to you to tell you. So one, I think it's educating yourself about mental health. What is it? What are the signs? What can you look out for? There's loads of free resources. There's also training. So I would say invest in some training if possible. Two, get to know your employees. The best way is to be able to spot it because you know how they normally show up. Even on a Teams call, I know it's more challenging, but if you know what they usually like when they're not like that. And yes, some people can hide it, but it's just constantly checking in and making sure that I think when somebody says, how are you? How often in a corridor or even on a Teams call, someone says, how are you? And our immediate reaction is, good, thanks, you, or I'm fine. Stop and say, no, really, how are you? So ask twice. You'll be surprised. I mean, it's a really easy way at some of the responses you might actually get. And don't be afraid. I really want to stress, don't be afraid of what they say. If they say something that you don't feel comfortable chatting about, just listen. Don't have to solution anything. Just listening, potentially signposting them to somebody you can help, whether it be a doctor. But just listening in the first instance will do much more than you probably imagine it would do.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you, Hayley. Just kind of following on from that question, we have another question about, so in the Middle East, they have a number of expat workers, and it can sometimes be difficult to get that feedback and that interaction from those workers. How could we overcome that?
Okay. I probably need to understand the exact challenge with the expat workers, but I think in terms of how we open channels of communication, don't have one solution or one thing. So you could look at forums, you could look at surveys, you could look at feedback forms, opportunity to consult, having your human resources have an open day. So keep the options for feedback really, really open is what I would say, because not one style fits all. The other thing is don't give up. Now, often with things like this is we want instant gratification. We want somebody to come to us. So we'll start a program and we'll be talking about mental health, and we're hoping that everybody will start to talk more about it. It is a slow burner because it's about embedding trust to make sure that if they do tell you that they've got mental health, they're not going to get fired, because we've grown up in a world where it hasn't been something that we talk about. So keep pushing it, keep going. It won't happen immediately, but keeping those channels open, people will come around if they believe it's authentic, and they believe that there's genuine care there to make improvement for both of you. Because yes, you care for them, but you want the workplace to be happy and as safe as reasonably possible as well.
Lovely. I think we've got time for one more question. So sorry if I haven't managed to cover them all, everyone. So this question's from James. In the phase of an organisation not having an EAP, how do you as an organisation provide support in the short term when psychosocial issues are raised? So I suppose it's how do you support psychosocial issues?
Yeah, really good question. So, and I think this is a great question, James, because often organisations who do have an EAP think that that is the solution. The EAP can support, but actually, I think it's probably about people like your health and safety team and your HR team working together, putting people at the centre. So if we're talking about psychosocial risks that impact the whole. So if we know that there's a call center team and there's been a lot of high levels of stress, it could come through in absenteeism, could come through in just the word on the street, you know, or what you hear in the call center. We need to have some conversations about what's actually going on. So try and get to the core of the problem using the HR team and health and safety team together, doing risk assessments. And if it's lack of resource, is it something that can be fixed, or can it not be fixed because of budget constraints? But I would say really getting to the root cause of the problem that's impacting the team, but don't do it alone and don't expect the line manager to solution it, because the line manager may be part of the challenge. If it's an individual, I would definitely say individual risk assessment, regular follow-ups, and making sure you've got a case management team to see that that gets resolved, rather than relying on one person to do the weekly check-in, because that might not happen.
Lovely, brilliant. Thank you, Hayley. I'll hand over to you now, Daryl.
Thank you, Hayley. Very interesting, and I really thought the 6 ways to well-being were certainly something that I'll take away with me from tonight, and trying to get it implemented in my company here anyway. I think it's a very important area. It's a huge area, and 45,003 is, as you said, it's a slow burner. It's going to take time. I think part of it, we had a question there about the Middle East. I think part of it is the male ego, if that's the right word. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine, and they keep going, maybe not realizing later down the line they could be suffering with some sort of mental issues. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, Hayley, and thank you very much. And possibly we'll have to organise a few more, or one or two more of these sessions. There is some questions that we left behind. That particularly good question there about quality of life and well-being. I think that's maybe another session on its own. We also had 1 or 2 very interesting questions. And I think we all need to go away and study it for a little bit. It's about the teacher-student interaction and how that can have an effect on mental health and well-being. And again, another very good question that maybe needs more time, and unfortunately time is against us. There's one of those stressors. How do we control the time, Hayley? Thank you very much to Hayley. Thank you, Donna. And thank you to all of you that attended. We have run out over time now at this stage, so we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, and look forward to your input, and keep talking on WhatsApp and on the LinkedIn, and keep checking the page. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Hayley. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care,
You too.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.